Before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your city in the comments below, and if you believe in dignity and justice, hit like and subscribe. Now, back to Amara Bell. Amara Bell had learned how to disappear in rooms built for powerful men. She knew how to walk across marble floors without making a sound. She knew how to lower her eyes when men in tailored suits laughed too loudly, drank too much, and forgot that the people serving them were human. She knew how to carry silver trays through smoke, perfume, and arrogance without letting any of it touch her face. But that night, inside the grand ballroom of the Moretti Hotel, invisibility was not enough to protect her. The chandelier above her glittered like frozen fire. Violins played softly near the fountain. Champagne towers rose beside white roses and gold name cards. It was the kind of room where every smile had a price, every handshake hit a deal, and every guest believed the city existed only to serve them. Amara moved between them in a black uniform pressed so neatly it looked like armor. Her natural curls were pinned back. Her shoes were old but polished. Her hands were steady as she collected empty glasses from a long table near the stage. Then someone spilled red wine across the white linen. A man laughed. Not an embarrassed laugh. Not an apology. A cruel one. Councilman Victor Hale leaned back in his chair, cheeks flushed, gold watch flashing under the chandelier. He was surrounded by donors, businessmen, and women in diamonds who laughed at everything he said because power had taught them when to laugh. "Girl," Victor called, snapping his fingers. Amara turned slowly. "Yes, sir." He pointed at the stains spreading across the tablecloth. "Clean it." There was nothing unusual in the order. She had cleaned worse. She had swallowed worse. So she stepped forward, unfolded a cloth, and began blotting the wine carefully. That was when Victor reached out and grabbed her wrist. The room did not stop at first. The violins kept playing. Glasses kept clinking. Someone kept laughing near the bar. But Amara felt everything narrow to that one hand around her skin. His fingers were heavy. Entitled. Careless. In the way powerful people became when they believed no one would ever correct them. "Careful," Victor said, smiling at his table. "These people always act nervous around nice things." A few guests chuckled. Amara looked down at his hand, then back at him. "Please let go of my wrist, sir." Her voice was soft. Too soft for the room, but not weak. Victor's smile widened. "Oh, listen to that," he said, turning to the others. "She has manners." The woman beside him covered her mouth, pretending to be shocked, but her eyes were bright with amusement. Amara did not pull away. She knew better. A woman like her could be accused of aggression for simply protecting herself. So she stood still, shoulders straight, chin lifted just enough to keep her dignity from falling to the floor with the spilled wine. "I only came to clean the table," she said. Victor leaned closer. "And I said clean it." His voice was lower now. Meaner. A manager near the wall saw everything. Amara saw him seeing it. Their eyes met for half a second. Then he looked away. That hurt more than the hand. Because cruelty was one thing. Cowardice was another. Around the table, the laughter grew quieter, but no one stood. No one spoke. No one wanted to offend a councilman whose name was printed on half the invitations in the city. And above them, on the second-floor balcony, a man in a black suit stopped walking. Lorenzo Moretti had not planned to attend the fundraiser. He owned the hotel, but he hated rooms like this. Rooms filled with men who smiled too much and respected too little. He had come only to meet a judge in private, sign one document, and leave before midnight. But then he saw Amara. He saw the wine stain. He saw Victor Hale's hand locked around her wrist. And something old moved behind his eyes. Not rage. Not yet. Something colder. Lorenzo placed one hand on the balcony railing. The gold ring on his finger caught the light. Behind him, two bodyguards stopped breathing like statues. Down below, Victor was still smiling. "She's just staff," he said loudly, as if the room needed permission to continue laughing. That was when Lorenzo began descending the stairs. One step, then another. The violins faltered. A waiter froze with a tray in his hands. People noticed him slowly, the way people notice thunder before rain reaches the glass. Conversations died in pieces. First near the staircase, then by the fountain, then across the entire ballroom. Victor did not notice until Lorenzo was standing behind him. The air changed. Amara felt it before she saw him. Victor's grip loosened. Lorenzo Moretti looked at the hand on Amara's wrist. Then he looked at Victor Hale. His voice was quiet, almost gentle. but it cut through the ballroom sharper than any shout. Who dared touch my black maid? The room went silent. 3 months earlier, Amara Bell had walked through the service entrance of the Moretti Hotel with one pair of polished shoes, 2 clean uniforms, and a folder full of documents proving she was worth hiring. The service entrance was nothing like the front lobby. No crystal lights, no velvet ropes, no golden mirrors reflecting beautiful people back at themselves. Just gray walls, metal lockers, a time clock, and the smell of bleach mixed with old coffee. But to Amara, it had still felt like a door opening. She needed this job. Her younger brother, Isaiah, was in his 2nd year of college, studying engineering with the kind of hope that made Amara both proud and terrified. Their mother had passed away 6 years earlier, and since then, Amara had become more than a sister. She became the bill payer, the emergency contact, the one who smiled on video calls even when her feet were swollen from standing 12 hours straight. Just one more semester, Isaiah always told her. Then I'll get internships. I'll help. And Amara always smiled. You just study, she would say. Let me handle the rest. Handling the rest meant working breakfast shifts at a diner before sunrise. It meant cleaning offices after midnight when the city outside looked like it belonged to someone else. It meant taking the Moretti Hotel job because the pay was better, the tips were decent, and the staff supervisor promised steady hours if she kept her head down. Keeping her head down was something Amara had learned young. She had learned it in grocery stores when security guards followed her too closely. She had learned it in classrooms when teachers praised loud confidence in other children but called her attitude when she spoke with the same strength. She had learned it from landlords, customers, managers, and strangers who mistook gentleness for permission. So when the head housekeeper, Mrs. Alvarez, gave her the rules on her first day, Amara listened carefully. No gossip, no staring at guests, no asking who they are, no repeating anything you hear in private rooms. This hotel serves politicians, judges, businessmen, and people whose names you do not want in your mouth. Mrs. Alvarez leaned closer, lowering her voice. And if Mr. Moretti enters a room, you move out of his way. Amara had heard the name before. Everyone in the city had. Lorenzo Moretti. Some called him a hotel owner. Some called him an investor. Some whispered other things when they thought walls had no ears. His family had money older than most buildings downtown and power that moved quietly through restaurants, courtrooms, clubs, and police stations. Amara had seen him only twice before the fundraiser. The first time, he crossed the lobby surrounded by men in dark suits. He did not look left or right. The entire hotel seemed to hold its breath until he passed. The second time, she had been replacing flowers in the private elevator hall when he stepped inside unexpectedly. For one brief second, his eyes met hers. Amara lowered her gaze immediately. "Good evening, sir," she whispered. He said nothing. The elevator doors closed between them like the end of a scene. After that, Amara decided Lorenzo Moretti was exactly what people said he was: cold, untouchable, carved from wealth and silence. And that suited her fine. She was not there to be noticed by dangerous men. She was there to work. She learned the rhythm of the hotel quickly. Which guests tipped, which guests touched too much, which managers protected staff, and which ones protected money. She learned that expensive perfume could not hide cruelty, and polished shoes did not always belong to gentlemen. Still, she did her job with care. She folded towels as if someone's mother might use them. She arranged flowers as if beauty mattered even in rooms where men lied for a living. She carried trays through parties where no one remembered her face, only whether their glass was full. Every night, before leaving, she sent Isaiah a message. "Proud of you. Keep going." Most nights, he sent one back. "Proud of you too, sis." That was enough to keep her standing. But on the night of Victor Hale's fundraiser, something felt wrong from the beginning. The ballroom had been transformed into a palace of gold light and white roses. Cameras flashed near the entrance. Reporters smiled too widely. Councilman Hale moved through the crowd like a man already practicing victory. Amara noticed how the staff stiffened when he arrived. One waitress whispered, "Stay away from him if you can." Amara looked at her. "Why?" The girl's face tightened. "Just stay away." But staying away was not always a choice. By 9 o'clock, Amara had already served Victor's table twice. Each time, his eyes followed her a little too long. Each time, his smile carried something sharp beneath it. She ignored it. That was another skill she had learned. Ignore the look. ignore the laugh, ignore the comment, finish the shift, pay the bill, survive the night. But survival has a sound. Sometimes, it is the quiet click of a tray being set down. Sometimes, it is a woman swallowing words that would cost her everything. And sometimes, it is the exact moment a man in power mistakes silence for weakness. That moment came when Victor Hale lifted his glass, smiled at the donors around him, and let the red wine spill deliberately across the white tablecloth. Then he snapped his fingers. Girl. Amara turned, and the room began moving toward judgment. Victor Hale did not spill the wine by accident. Amara knew at the moment she saw his eyes. The glass had tilted slowly in his hand, almost lazily, as if he wanted her to watch the red liquid pour across the white linen. It spread like a stain on snow, soaking into the expensive cloth, dripping toward the edge of the table. A few guests gasped. Victor only smiled. Oops, he said. Then came the snap of his fingers. Sharp, small, cruel. Girl. The word struck harder than it should have. Not because Amara had never heard it before. She had heard worse from men with cheaper suits and smaller names. But here, under chandeliers bright enough to make every diamond sparkle, surrounded by judges, donors, and city officials, the insult felt rehearsed. Public. Designed to remind her exactly where he believed she belonged. Amara stepped forward with a clean cloth in her hand. Yes, councilman? Victor leaned back, enjoying the way his audience turned toward them. Clean this up before it ruins the table. Of course. She kept her voice level. That was important. A steady voice could be armor when a person had nothing else. She bent slightly and began blotting the wine from the linen. The cloth drank in the stain, turning dark red beneath her fingers. Around her, the guests continued pretending this was normal. A woman in pearls whispered, "Poor thing," but did not sound sorry. A man beside her chuckled into his glass. Victor watched Amara work for a moment, then spoke loudly enough for the whole table to hear. You know, I admire people like you. Amara's hand paused for less than a second. Sir, people who understand service. His smile widened. Too many folks these days forget their place. But you? You seem trained properly. The laughter came softly at first. One person, then two. Then the whole table relaxed into it, because cruelty is easier when it becomes a group activity. Amara felt heat rise in her face, but she did not let it reach her eyes. I'm here to do my job, sir. Victor's expression changed. Not much, just enough. The smile remained, but the warmth disappeared from behind it. He was not used to being answered with dignity. Men like Victor preferred silence from the people they hurt. Silence made them feel generous. Silence made them feel clean. He reached for his wine glass again, but this time his hand did not go to the glass. It went to Amara's wrist. His fingers closed around her skin. The contact sent a shock through her body, but she did not jerk away. She knew the room would punish her for that. They would say she overreacted. They would say she misunderstood. They would say Victor Hale was only joking. So she stood perfectly still. Please let go of my wrist, sir. The table quieted, not with concern, with interest. Victor looked up at her slowly. Excuse me. Amara met his eyes. Only for a second. Long enough to show she was afraid, but not broken. I said, please let go of my wrist. Across the ballroom, Marcus Vale, the event manager, froze near the champagne station. He had seen the whole thing. Amara saw him seeing it. Their eyes locked. For one breath, hope rose in her chest. Then Marcus looked away. He lifted his radio to his mouth and pretended to speak into it. Amara felt something inside her sink. Victor noticed. Of course he noticed. Men like him always noticed when no one was brave enough to stop them. He leaned closer, still holding her wrist. You should be careful, he said softly. Jobs like yours are easy to lose. The words were quiet, but everyone at the table heard them. A young waitress passing behind Amara slowed down, her face pale. She looked like she wanted to help. Then her eyes flickered toward Victor, toward the cameras, toward the donors, and she kept walking. Amara did not blame her. That was the worst part. She understood every person who chose safety over courage. She had done it herself more times than she could count. Victor turned back to his guests. See? This is what happens when staff spend too much time around luxury. They start thinking they're part of it. A louder laugh this time. One man actually clapped his hand against the table. Amara's throat tightened. She thought of Isaiah studying under fluorescent library lights, believing his sister worked in a respectable hotel. She thought of her mother's voice telling her never to let anyone make her small. She thought of the rent due Friday, the tuition payment due Monday, and the impossible price of pride. So she swallowed the tears. Not because she had no pain, because she refused to let them drink from it. "I'll finish cleaning now," she said. Victor's grip tightened just enough to remind her he could. Then, from somewhere above them, the music faltered. One violin missed a note. Then another. The laughter at Victor's table faded unevenly, as if someone had turned down the volume of the room. Amara did not turn around at first. She felt the change before she understood it. A pressure in the air. A silence moving across the ballroom. Victor's fingers loosened. Someone whispered a name. Moretti. Only then did Amara look up. At the top of the staircase stood Lorenzo Moretti, one hand resting on the railing, his face unreadable beneath the gold light. He was not looking at the donors. He was not looking at the cameras. He was looking at Victor Hale's hand on Amara's wrist. And for the first time that night, the people who had laughed began to understand they had chosen the wrong side of the room. Lorenzo Moretti had seen many kinds of fear in his life. He had seen men fear losing money. He had seen politicians fear exposure. He had seen liars fear silence, because silence gave truth room to breathe. But the fear he saw in Amara Bell's eyes was different. It was not the fear of someone weak. It was the fear of someone calculating the cost of standing up for herself in a room that had already decided she was disposable. That was what made Lorenzo stop at the top of the staircase. He had been on his way out. The private meeting with Judge Callahan had ended 10 minutes earlier. The papers were signed. The arrangements were made. His driver was already waiting behind the hotel, engine running, headlights cutting through the misty Chicago night. Lorenzo had no interest in Victor Hale's fundraiser. He disliked Victor's smile, disliked his speeches, disliked the way the councilman shook hands with working men during campaigns, and forgot their names the moment cameras disappeared. But Victor was useful to certain people, and useful men were often tolerated longer than decent ones. That was the way the city worked. Or at least, that was the lie men told themselves when they wanted to sleep at night. Then Lorenzo looked down into the ballroom and saw Victor's hand around Amara's wrist. Something inside him went still. Not calm. Still. There was a difference. Behind him, his head of security, Matteo Russo, leaned closer. "Boss." Lorenzo did not answer. His eyes remained fixed on the table below. He watched Amara stand there with her back straight, her chin lifted, her voice too far away to hear, but her dignity visible even from the balcony. He watched the guests laugh. He watched the manager turn away. He watched Victor enjoy the moment like a man biting into expensive fruit. And suddenly, Lorenzo was no longer seeing the ballroom. He was seeing a kitchen in Brooklyn 30 years ago. His mother, Elena Moretti, stood beside a sink full of dishes in a house that did not belong to her. Her hands were cracked from soap. Her shoes were split at the heel. A rich woman in a silk robe had accused her of stealing a bracelet that was later found under a velvet cushion. No apology came. Only a cold sentence. "People like you should be grateful we let you inside." Lorenzo had been 9 years old, hidden in the hallway, small fists curled at his sides, too young to protect her and old enough to understand shame. That night, his mother had knelt in front of him and taken his face in her tired hands. "Listen to me, Lorenzo," she whispered. "Never become cruel, just because the world was cruel first. Power without humility is just another dirty room someone else has to clean." He had not understood then. For years, he had built his empire on fear, silence, loyalty, and debt. Men lowered their voices when he entered. Doors opened before he touched them. Judges returned calls. Bankers smiled. Enemies reconsidered. But none of that had made him noble. It had only made him obeyed. Now, watching Amara stand alone in a room full of cowards, his mother's words returned with the weight of judgment. Power without humility. Lorenzo's fingers tightened once around the railing. The gold ring on his hand caught the chandelier light. Then he began walking down. One step. The violin nearest the staircase missed a note. Another step. A server stopped mid-pour, champagne trembling at the lip of the bottle. Another step. Conversations broke apart like thin glass. By the time Lorenzo reached the ballroom floor, people were no longer looking at Amara with amusement. They were looking at Lorenzo with caution. That was the first change. The second was Victor Hale finally noticing the silence. His smile faltered. His hand loosened around Amara's wrist. But he did not let go completely. Pride held his fingers there 1 second too long. 1 second was enough. Lorenzo crossed the final stretch of marble without hurry. His black suit carried no flash, no decoration, nothing to soften him. His face was calm, but his eyes had gone dark in a way that made men twice Victor's size remember appointments elsewhere. He stopped beside Amara. Not in front of her. Beside her. That detail mattered. He did not look at her like property. He did not look at her like charity. He stood close enough for the room to understand she was no longer alone. Then Lorenzo lowered his gaze to Victor's hand. Let her go. Victor gave a short laugh, but it died halfway out of his mouth. Lorenzo, he said, trying to sound friendly. This is nothing. Your staff member got a little sensitive. Lorenzo did not blink. My staff member asked you to release her. The ballroom held its breath. Amara could feel her pulse in her throat. She could smell red wine, candle wax, and Victor's expensive cologne. She could feel Lorenzo's presence beside her like a closed door between her and the storm. Victor finally removed his hand. Amara stepped back once. Only once. Lorenzo saw the faint mark on her wrist. His jaw tightened. Not enough for most people to notice. But Matteo Russo noticed. So did every man in the room who had ever survived by reading danger before it spoke. Victor adjusted his cufflinks, trying to recover the performance. Come on, Moretti. She's just a maid. That was when Lorenzo lifted his eyes. And the whole city, though it did not know it yet, shifted slightly on its foundations. No, he said quietly. She is a woman under my roof. He turned his head, looking slowly at the guests who had laughed, the manager who had looked away, the donors who now studied the floor. And every person in this room forgot what that means. The silence deepened. Amara's eyes stayed steady. Lorenzo looked back at Victor. You wanted an audience, councilman. His voice lowered. Now you have one. You wanted an audience, councilman. Lorenzo's words did not echo. They landed. Heavy. Precise. Impossible to ignore. Victor Hale looked around the ballroom as if searching for someone brave enough to laugh first. No one did. The donors who had leaned toward him minutes earlier now leaned away. The woman in pearls suddenly became fascinated by the rim of her champagne glass. A judge near the fountain lowered his eyes. Power had a smell. So did fear. And in that moment, the room was full of both. Victor forced a smile onto his face. Lorenzo, let's not turn a small misunderstanding into a scene. A misunderstanding? Lorenzo asked. His voice remained calm, which made it worse. Victor spread his hands like a man addressing voters. She was cleaning the table. I touched her arm to get her attention. That's all. You know how people exaggerate these days. Amara felt the words crawl over her skin. People. Not women. Not workers. Not human beings. People. The kind of word men used when they wanted to erase the person standing in front of them. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. Rent was due Friday. Isaiah's tuition payment was due Monday. A man like Victor Hale could make one phone call and ruin her life in ways that never left fingerprints. Lorenzo turned slightly toward her. He did not speak for her. He did not demand she perform her pain for the room. He only said, low enough that the others had to strain to hear. Miss Bell, did you ask him to let go? Amara looked at him. For the first time, really looked at him. The man beside her was everything the city whispered about. Dangerous, rich, untouchable. His name alone could change the temperature of a room. But in that moment, he was not asking like an owner protecting property. He was asking like a witness making space for the truth. Amara swallowed. Yes, she said. Twice. Lorenzo nodded once. Then he looked back at Victor. There is your misunderstanding. Victor's face tightened. Are you seriously going to take the word of a hotel made over mine? The sentence exposed him more completely than any confession could have. A low breath moved through the ballroom. Not shock exactly. Recognition. Because everyone had known what Victor meant. He was simply arrogant enough to say it out loud. Lorenzo stepped closer to the table. Say that again. Victor blinked. What? Say it again, Lorenzo repeated. But this time, look at every server, every housekeeper, every dishwasher, every woman in this room who has ever been told her voice costs less than a man's reputation. Victor's mouth opened. Nothing came out. The cameras near the entrance had turned now. Phones had risen discreetly from pockets and purses. Reporters who had come for campaign photographs were suddenly awake, eyes bright, fingers hovering over screens. Marcus Vale, the event manager, hurried forward with a face pale enough to match the tablecloth. Mr. Moretti, he whispered. Perhaps we should handle this privately. Lorenzo turned his head slowly. Marcus stopped walking. Privately, Lorenzo said. The word was soft, but Marcus flinched as if it had weight. Yes, sir. I only mean for the reputation of the hotel. The reputation of this hotel was damaged the moment my employee asked for help with her eyes, and you looked away. Marcus went still. Amara felt the sentence strike somewhere deep, because he had seen it. Not just Victor's hand, not just the insult. He had seen the second wound, the one left by every person who could have helped and chose comfort instead. Lorenzo faced the room. No one moves. The security staff at the exit straightened, not threatening, just present. The music had stopped completely. Even the fountain seemed too loud now, its water falling in soft silver threads behind the silence. Lorenzo lifted one hand. Matteo Russo stepped forward from the edge of the crowd. Security footage, Lorenzo said. All angles from this ballroom. Now. Victor laughed once, too sharp. This is ridiculous. I'm a councilman. And tonight, Lorenzo said, you are a man on camera. That ended the laughter. Victor's confidence flickered. Only for a second. But Amara saw it. So did Lorenzo. So did every person who had spent the last 10 minutes pretending they did not understand what was happening. Matteo spoke quietly into his earpiece. Across the ballroom, the large screen behind the stage, the one meant to show Victor's campaign slogan, went black. Then the hotel logo disappeared. A security feed appeared in its place. Grainy. Silent. Clear. Enough. There was Victor tilting his glass. There was the wine spilling. There was Amara approaching with the cloth. There was his hand closing around her wrist. The room watched itself become guilty. No one spoke. On the screen, Amara's mouth moved. Please let go of my wrist, sir. Even without sound, everyone understood. Victor's face lost color. The woman in pearls lowered her champagne. Marcus stared at the floor. Lorenzo did not look away from the screen until the footage showed the final moment. Victor leaning toward Amara while the table laughed. Then Lorenzo turned back to him. You were right about one thing, councilman. Victor's lips parted. Lorenzo's eyes were cold now. This is not a scene. He paused. This is evidence. Amara stood beside him, her wrist still marked, her shoulders still straight. And for the first time that night, the people who had laughed at her began to fear the silence they had created. The word evidence sat in the ballroom like a loaded truth. No one moved. On the giant screen behind the stage, the frozen security image showed Victor Hale's hand around Amara's wrist. It showed the table watching. It showed Marcus Vale at the edge of the frame, looking directly toward them before turning away. There were no excuses left. Not polished ones. Not political ones. Not the kind rich men paid lawyers to build. Victor looked at the screen, then at the room, then at Lorenzo. This is illegal, he said quickly. You can't just show private footage in front of everyone. Lorenzo's expression did not change. You held a woman against her will in my ballroom. Victor's mouth tightened. I touched her arm. You ignored her answer. She's staff. The moment he said it again, the room seemed to shrink away from him. Even his own donors looked uncomfortable now. Not because they had suddenly become brave, but because public shame had finally made cowardice expensive. Lorenzo stepped forward, but Amara moved first. It was small, just one step, but the room felt it. For the first time that night, Amara Bell stood not behind a tray, not beside a stain, not beneath someone's hand, but in the center of the ballroom, under the chandelier light. With every eye on her, her wrist still ached, her heart still hammered, but something inside her had stopped running. Mr. Moretti, she said softly. Lorenzo turned toward her at once. Yes, Miss Bell. The respect in his voice changed the air more than his anger had. Amara looked at Victor, then at Marcus, then at the guests who had laughed because it was easier than helping. I don't want anyone hurt, she said. Victor seized on it immediately. There. See. She understands this went too far. Amara's eyes moved back to him. No, she said. I understand exactly how far it went. Victor went still. Her voice remained quiet, but it carried through the room because the silence had made space for it. This wasn't the first time. A murmur passed through the ballroom. Marcus lifted his head sharply. Amara continued. Not with me. Not only with me. I've heard the stories from other women on staff. Waitresses warned me to stay away from his table. Housekeepers changed floors when his campaign events were booked here. Bartenders joked about keeping their distance, but it wasn't really a joke. Victor's face hardened. You should be very careful what you accuse me of. Amara gave him a sad, steady look. That sentence is exactly why most of us stayed quiet. The room froze again. This time, not because of Lorenzo, because of her. Amara turned toward the staff gathered near the walls, servers in black vests, housekeepers in gray uniforms, kitchen runners still wearing aprons dusted with flour. Their faces carried the same familiar conflict, fear fighting with memory. I'm not asking anyone to speak before they're ready, Amara said. I know what it costs. I know rent is due. I know families depend on paychecks. I know people like him don't always need to fire you to punish you. Her voice trembled once. Only once. Then steadied. But I also know what happens when every person suffers alone. The powerful keep calling it a misunderstanding. A young waitress near the champagne station covered her mouth. Another looked down, crying silently. Lorenzo watched Amara, as if seeing the full shape of her for the first time. Not just the woman Victor had humiliated, but the woman who had been carrying other people's fear inside her own silence. He turned to Matteo. Open a private channel with legal. Every staff member who wants to report misconduct will be protected. Paid leave if needed. No retaliation. No exceptions. Marcus stepped forward, panicked. Sir, that could damage the hotel's relationship with the councilman's office. Lorenzo looked at him. No, Marcus. You damaged this hotel when you taught my employees that silence was policy. Marcus' face collapsed. Victor pushed back his chair. I'm leaving. Two security men moved calmly to the exits. They did not touch him. They did not need to. Lorenzo's voice followed him, low and controlled. You will leave when every camera has recorded you walking out of this room without apology. Victor stopped. For the first time all night, he looked afraid. Not of violence. Of witnesses. Of phones raised in quiet hands. Of the staff he had overlooked now looking back at him. Amara stood beneath the chandelier, her old shoes planted on polished marble, and realized something that nearly made her knees weaken. She was still afraid, but she was no longer alone. Lorenzo turned toward the room. Anyone who laughed, he said, will remember this night. Anyone who stayed silent will have a chance to decide who they become after it. Then he looked at Amara. The next words are yours. Every face turned to her. Amara took a breath, and in a voice soft enough to break the proudest hearts, she said, Play the footage again. This time, let everyone watch what they allowed. Play the footage again. Amara's words were quiet, but they carried farther than Lorenzo's anger ever could. For a moment, no one moved. Then Matteo gave a small nod toward the technician near the side wall. The screen flickered. The ballroom lights dimmed slightly, and Victor Hale's humiliation of Amara began again in silence. This time, no one laughed. They watched the wine spill. They watched Victor snap his fingers. They watched Amara approach with professional calm, cloth in hand, shoulders straight. They watched his fingers close around her wrist. In the first viewing, people had looked at Victor. In the second, they looked at themselves. The man who had clapped at the table lowered his head. The woman in pearls pressed trembling fingers against her necklace. Marcus Vale stared at his own image on the screen, the exact moment he saw Amara asking for help, then turned away. That was the kind of evidence no lawyer could soften. Not because it showed Victor's cruelty, because it showed everyone else's permission. Victor stood near the exit, his face pale beneath the gold lights. This is defamation, he said, but his voice had lost its polish. You're all witnesses. This man is trying to destroy me. Lorenzo looked at him with the calm of a closed door. No, councilman. You did that when you forgot cameras see what pride ignores. A reporter near the back lifted her phone higher. Victor noticed. Then another phone rose. Then another. Not dramatically. Not like a riot. Just quietly, one by one, as if the room itself had decided the truth deserved witnesses. Victor's campaign manager rushed toward him, whispering urgently. Victor shook his head, angry, sweating now, his perfect smile gone. He tried to push through the exit, but two hotel security guards stepped aside just enough to let the cameras capture his face as he left. No one touched him. No one threatened him. That made it worse. He walked out under the weight of his own image. The doors closed behind him with a soft click. Only then did the ballroom breathe. Amara stood perfectly still, feeling the blood pulse beneath the mark on her wrist. She expected relief to come like rain, but it did not. Not yet. What came first was exhaustion. A deep, bone-heavy exhaustion from years of swallowing moments like this and calling it survival. Lorenzo noticed. Miss Bell, he said gently. She turned. You should sit. I'm fine. No, he said. You are standing because you had to. That is not the same thing. The words reached her before she could defend herself. For the first time that night, her eyes filled. She blinked the tears back, angry at them. She did not want the room to remember her crying. She wanted them to remember she had stood. A chair appeared behind her, not brought by Lorenzo, not by Matteo, but by the young waitress, who had passed her earlier and kept walking. The girl's hands shook as she placed it near Amara. I'm sorry, she whispered. Amara looked at her. For 1 second, the ballroom held its breath again. Then Amara reached out and touched the girl's hand. I know, she said. That broke something open. Not loudly. One housekeeper began to cry near the wall. A dishwasher removed his cap and stared at the floor. A bartender wiped his eyes with the back of his sleeve. These were not dramatic people. They were tired people. People who knew what it meant to smile while being disrespected because rent did not care about pride. Lorenzo turned to Matteo. Every staff member stays on paid time tonight. Food from the kitchen. Transportation home. No one loses wages because this room finally learned shame. Matteo nodded. And Victor Hale? Lorenzo's eyes shifted toward the closed doors. Send the footage to the ethics board, his donors, every network that requested access tonight, and every union attorney in the city. Marcus swallowed. Sir, that could start a war with City Hall. Lorenzo looked at him. No, Marcus. It ends 1. By midnight, Victor Hale's campaign team issued a statement calling the incident misinterpreted. By 1 in the morning, 3 staff members had submitted private complaints. By 2, a donor withdrew from the fundraiser. By 3, the first news outlet posted the footage. By 4, Victor's name was no longer attached to dignity, leadership, or public service. It was attached to a woman's wrist. And by dawn, across coffee shops, bus stops, office elevators, and kitchen tables, the city watched a powerful man learn the one thing men like him feared most. Not violence. Not revenge. Accountability. Back inside the empty ballroom, Amara remained seated beneath the chandelier as staff cleared the tables around her with unusual tenderness. Lorenzo stood a few feet away, his hands folded in front of him. For once, he looked less like a man who owned the room, and more like a man asking whether he deserved to stand in it. By 7 in the morning, the Moretti Hotel no longer looked like the same place. The ballroom had been cleaned. The wine stain was gone. The white roses had been gathered from the tables and placed in silver buckets near the service hallway. The campaign banners had been removed before sunrise, folded into hard rectangles of failure, and carried out through the back entrance. But some stains did not leave with water. Some stayed in memory. Amara Bell stood outside the hotel with her coat buttoned to her throat, staring at the front doors. For 3 months, she had entered through the service entrance. Always the side alley, always the gray door, always the hallway that smelled of bleach and old coffee. That morning, for reasons she could not fully explain, her feet had brought her to the front. The gold revolving doors turned slowly beneath the Moretti crest. Guests in wool coats stepped through them without thinking, pulling suitcases, checking phones, carrying the easy confidence of people who had never wondered whether they belonged somewhere. Amara wondered. Her wrist still carried a faint mark. She had covered it with her sleeve, but she could feel it beneath the fabric, not as pain anymore, but as proof. Her phone had not stopped buzzing since dawn. Isaiah had called 6 times. The first message came at 5:42. Sis, please tell me that isn't you on the news. Then another. Are you safe? Then another. I'm proud of you. Mom would be proud too. That last one had nearly broken her. Amara had sat on the edge of her bed in her small apartment, still wearing the same black uniform from the night before, and read those words until the screen blurred. She had not known how much she needed to hear them until they appeared in her brother's worried little bubbles of text. Now she stood before the hotel, breathing cold morning air, trying to convince herself to go inside. A taxi hissed past the curb. Somewhere down the street, a bus sighed open. The city had returned to its normal rhythm, but Amara felt as if the ground beneath her had been quietly rearranged. Miss Bell. She turned. Lorenzo Moretti stood a few steps behind her, dressed in a charcoal coat. No bodyguards crowding him, no cold army of men in dark suits. Just him, the morning light softening the edges of a face the city had learned to fear. Amara straightened instinctively. Mr. Moretti. His eyes moved briefly to the front doors, then back to her. You came to the wrong entrance. For a second, her stomach tightened. Then she saw his expression. Not mocking. Waiting. Amara looked at the revolving doors again. I've never used this one. I know. The honesty of it landed between them. He stepped beside her, not ahead, not behind. The hotel has many habits, he said. Some of them are old. Some of them are ugly. Last night made that clear. Amara's fingers tightened around the strap of her bag. Last night didn't create those habits. No, Lorenzo said quietly. It revealed them. A silence passed. Not empty. Heavy with all the things neither of them could fix with one speech, one apology, or one ruined politician. Then Lorenzo reached into his coat and removed a cream-colored envelope. Amara looked at it, but did not take it. If that's money, she said, her voice steady, I don't want it. For the first time, something like respect warmed his eyes. It is not money. He held it out. Amara accepted the envelope carefully. Her name was written across the front in black ink. Inside was a letter. Not long, but official. Her eyes moved across the lines once. Then again. She looked up. I don't understand. I think you do, Lorenzo said. The words on the page blurred for a moment. Director of Staff Protection and Ethics. A position that had not existed yesterday. A position with authority over employee complaints, safety protocols, guest misconduct reports, and direct access to ownership. Direct access to him. Amara shook her head slightly. I'm a housekeeper. You are a woman who stood in a room full of powerful people and told the truth when everyone else was counting the cost. That doesn't make me qualified. No, Lorenzo said. But surviving this place without becoming cruel does. Amara looked back down at the letter. Her first instinct was fear. Not joy. Fear. Because promotions could be traps. Titles could be cages. Powerful men sometimes offered chairs only to make silence look generous. She folded the paper carefully. Mr. Moretti, I need you to hear me clearly. I'm listening. I didn't. Needs saving. His face changed. Not offended. Struck. Amara held his gaze. I needed someone powerful enough to listen. There's a difference. The revolving doors turned behind them. Morning guests passed in and out, unaware that something sacred and fragile was being built on the sidewalk. Lorenzo nodded once. Slowly. Then teach me how. Those 4 words were quieter than anything he had said in the ballroom. And somehow, they carried more weight. Amara studied him for a long moment. The Mafia boss. The hotel owner. The man whose name made politicians lower their voices. Standing before her in the cold morning, asking to be taught by the woman his world had trained everyone not to see. She slipped the letter back into the envelope. Then she walked toward the front doors. Lorenzo did not open them for her. He did not make a performance of courtesy. He simply stepped aside and let her enter first. Inside, the lobby fell silent. The receptionist looked up. The bellman turned. Mrs. Alvarez stood near the flower desk, one hand pressed to her chest. Marcus Vale was gone. His nameplate had already been removed from the office door. Amara stepped onto the polished marble. Not through the side hallway. Not through the service corridor. Through the front. Her old shoes made a soft sound against the floor. Small. Clear. Unapologetic. And for the first time since she had started working at the Moretti Hotel, no one looked through her. They looked at her. By noon, Victor Hale's office had stopped answering calls. By 2 o'clock, his largest donor released a statement saying respect for working people was non-negotiable. By 4, the ethics board announced a formal review. By evening, the same reporters who had come to photograph his smile were replaying the footage of his hand around Amara Bell's wrist. The city did not need Lorenzo Moretti to explain what it had seen. It had eyes. It had memory. And for once, it had proof. Victor tried to survive the day with the language powerful men always used when truth cornered them. He said the clip lacked context. He said emotions were high. He said he had always respected people from every background. But the footage kept playing. The whine, the snap of his fingers, the grip, the laughter. The woman standing still because the cost of defending herself had always been too high. By sunset, Victor Hale was no longer the man giving speeches about public service. He was the man the whole city had watched mistake a worker's silence for permission. And silence, once broken, did not return easily. Inside the Moretti Hotel, something quieter began. Lorenzo shut down the ballroom for 1 week. Not for repairs. For meetings. Every housekeeper, server, dishwasher, valet, receptionist, and kitchen runner was invited during paid hours. No cameras. No donors. No speeches from men in suits pretending to understand work they had never done. Amara sat at the head of the long conference table, the cream-colored letter beside her, a notebook open in front of her. At first, no one spoke. They stared at the polished wood, at their folded hands, at the coffee cups cooling beside them. They had been trained to survive by making themselves small. It took time for a person to believe the room would not punish them for taking up space. Then the young waitress from the ballroom raised her hand. Her name was Celia. Her voice shook as she described another night, another guest, another manager who told her not to make trouble. Then a valet spoke. Then a housekeeper. Then a dishwasher who had worked in the hotel for 11 years removed his cap and said, "I thought nobody cared because nobody ever asked." Amara wrote everything down, not as gossip, as testimony. Lorenzo stood near the back wall, silent. For once, he did not command the room. He listened to it. And listening, he learned that fear did not always arrive with shouting. Sometimes fear wore a manager's smile. Sometimes it lived in a schedule suddenly reduced from 5 shifts to 2. Sometimes it sounded like, "Are you sure you want to report this?" By the end of the week, the hotel changed its rules. Guest misconduct would be documented. Staff complaints would bypass department managers. Retaliation would mean termination. Security would protect employees, not just wealthy visitors. And every new worker would receive a card with Amara Bell's direct number printed beneath one sentence. "You are not invisible here." The first time Amara saw the card, she had to look away. Not because she was weak, because healing sometimes hurt more than the wound. A month later, she walked through the lobby just after sunrise. The marble floors shone beneath her old shoes. The chandeliers were still bright. The guests were still wealthy. The city was still the city. But something had shifted. A bellman greeted her by name. Mrs. Alvarez smiled from the flower desk. Celia lifted a tray and winked. Near the elevators, a new housekeeper stood nervously in a gray uniform, eyes lowered, shoulders tight, in that familiar shape of someone trying not to be seen. Amara stopped beside her. "What's your name?" The young woman blinked, startled. "Ruth, ma'am." Amara smiled gently. "Welcome, Ruth. Around here, we look people in the eye." Ruth hesitated. Then slowly, she lifted her face. Across the lobby, Lorenzo Moretti watched from the second-floor balcony, the same place where judgment had begun. He looked down at Amara, not as staff, not as a symbol, not as someone he had rescued, as someone who had rescued something in him. Mateo stepped beside him. "City's still talking about Hale." Lorenzo's gaze remained on Amara. "Good. They're saying people fear you more than ever." For a long moment, Lorenzo said nothing. Then he looked at the lobby, at the workers moving through morning light, at the woman who had turned humiliation into a door others could walk through. "No," he said quietly. "They finally fear the right thing." Mateo frowned. "What's that?" Lorenzo's eyes softened. "The truth." Below, Amara crossed the marble floor with Ruth beside her. She did not walk near the wall anymore. She did not shrink when guests passed. She moved through the front lobby as if dignity had always belonged there. Because it had. And by dawn, the city had learned what fear really meant. Not fear of power. Fear of what happens when the powerless are finally believed. And that day, the world remembered what dignity looks like.